Denzel Washington stepped into the boutique quietly, dressed simply in a dark hoodie and jeans, sunglasses shielding his eyes, though the afternoon sun had already begun to dip behind the city skyline. And the gold light spilling into the store painted the racks of luxury clothing in a warm, rich hue. He moved slowly between the displays, his fingers brushing lightly over the fine fabrics, cashmere sweaters, tailored jackets, crisp designer shirts lined neatly along the walls. The store was relatively empty, save for a few other patrons scattered near the front and 2 employees behind the counter who barely lifted their heads when the door chimed. Denzel didn't expect to be recognized immediately. He enjoyed the anonymity that sometimes accompanied simplicity. He picked up a jacket, a sleek charcoal-colored piece, and examined it thoughtfully, picturing how it might fit, how it would feel on a brisk evening. He turned it over, reading the tag, lost momentarily in the small pleasure of shopping without an entourage, without flashes of cameras. That piece shattered suddenly when a voice, sharp and dismissive, sliced through the soft background music. "You need to leave," the saleswoman said loudly enough that several heads turned. Denzel looked up, confused, wondering if she was speaking to someone else behind him. But when their eyes met, he realized she meant him. He furrowed his brow, still holding the jacket, unsure he heard correctly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but laced with disbelief. The woman, a tall blonde in a tight black dress and heels that clicked angrily against the floor, walked closer, arms crossed over her chest, her face tight with disdain. "I said, you need to leave. We don't serve your kind here," she snapped, her words deliberate, each syllable spat out like venom. Denzel blinked, stunned, his mind racing to process what he had just heard. "My kind?" he repeated slowly, feeling a cold wave of shock rising in him. "You mean black people?" he asked, louder now, his voice carrying across the store, drawing more attention from the other shoppers. She sneered, tossing her platinum hair over her shoulder, and said with no hesitation, "That's right. We don't need troublemakers or thieves in here. Take your business somewhere else." Denzel stood frozen for a moment, the jacket still hanging from his hand, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a sudden storm. His heart hammered in his chest, not from fear, but from a deep, boiling anger mixed with disbelief. He had faced racism before, yes, but not like this. Not so openly, not so viciously. He took a breath, forcing himself to stay composed, though his fists clenched at his sides. "You have no right to speak to me like that," he said, his voice low and firm. "I have every right," she snapped back, stepping closer, her face inches from his. "Now get out before I call security to throw your black ass onto the street." The room seemed to tilt for a moment, the soft music warping in his ears, the curious stares of the other customers burning into his skin. Denzel shook his head, trying to grasp the surreal cruelty of the moment. "Call them," he said, challenging her, standing his ground. "Let's see how you explain this to the police when they get here." The saleswoman laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and ugly. "Honey, they're not going to help you. You better run before things get ugly." Denzel's jaw tightened. He set the jacket carefully back on the rack, unwilling to give her any excuse to accuse him of anything. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. The woman noticed, and her expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. But before Denzel could make a call, 2 large security guards appeared from a side hallway, their faces unreadable, but their intentions clear. "Sir," one said gruffly, already moving toward him, "we're going to have to ask you to leave immediately." "Ask me why," Denzel said loudly, his eyes never leaving the saleswoman. The guard hesitated, but then reached for Denzel's arm. "Let's not make a scene," he muttered under his breath. "A scene," Denzel repeated incredulously, jerking his arm away. "This woman just told me to leave because of the color of my skin, and you want me to be quiet about it?" The guards didn't answer. Instead, they each moved to flank him, guiding him roughly toward the door. Denzel resisted slightly, but realized he was outnumbered and outmatched for now. As they pushed him toward the entrance, he turned his head over his shoulder, locking eyes with the saleswoman, who smirked triumphantly, her arms folded like a victorious queen surveying her conquered territory. "This isn't over," Denzel said, his voice steady, his anger now burning cold inside him. The guards pushed open the glass doors and practically threw him onto the sidewalk, the heavy door swinging shut behind him with a loud thud. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, feeling the eyes of passers-by on him, some curious, some indifferent. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fury, from humiliation, from 1,000 old wounds ripped open anew in an instant. He tightened his grip around his phone, his mind already racing ahead. He wasn't going to let this stand. Not today. Not ever. Without hesitation, he scrolled to his contacts and dialed. As the line rang, he looked up at the pristine store windows, at the mannequins dressed in perfect, soulless outfits. And he promised himself that the people behind that glass were going to learn a very hard lesson about respect and consequences. Denzel stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds, the cold evening air hitting his face, but doing nothing to cool the fire raging inside him. He stared at the reflection of the boutique windows, his own figure looking small and distorted against the glittering display of expensive clothing and hollow glamour. He shook his head slowly, trying to make sense of what had just happened, trying to convince himself that maybe, somehow, he had misunderstood. Maybe she hadn't meant it like that. Maybe he was overreacting. He took a breath, steadied himself, and pushed the door open again, stepping back into the shop with a calmness that belied the storm inside him. The chime of the door sounded like a warning bell. The saleswoman immediately snapped her head toward him, her expression morphing from smug satisfaction to open irritation. "Did I stutter?" she barked, marching toward him as if she owned the floor beneath her heels. "I said get out of here, black boy." The words hit Denzel harder than any physical blow. For a second, he just stood there, stunned, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Around him, the other customers froze, their conversations halting mid-sentence, their shopping bags dangling forgotten from their hands. Denzel blinked, feeling like he had been punched in the gut. "Boy," he repeated slowly, his voice low and vibrating with controlled fury. "Did you just call me boy?" The saleswoman didn't even flinch. She leaned in closer, her breath hot and sour. "That's right," she hissed. "Now move your black ass before you really regret it." Denzel's mind raced, 1,000 thoughts flashing through his head at once. Memories of his father, of the stories he had been told about being called boy, in a different era, about dignity, about pride, about standing tall no matter what. His fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay in control. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said, his voice shaking slightly from the effort of keeping it even. "And you have no right to treat me, or anyone else, like this." The saleswoman laughed harshly, the sound brittle and cruel. "I don't care if you're the King of England, you're not welcome here. Now get up before I call the security guards to throw you out like the trash you are." Denzel's face hardened. "Go ahead," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I'll call the police myself. Let's see how this plays out for you." He started dialing, but she lunged forward and slapped the phone out of his hand, sending it clattering to the floor. "You don't make the rules here, boy," she sneered. "Security!" she screamed, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that made everyone in the store turn and stare. Within seconds, the two large security guards reappeared, moving quickly toward Denzel, their faces grim and determined. Denzel held up his hands, stepping back slightly. "Don't touch me," he said firmly. "I have every right to be here. I haven't done anything wrong." One of the guards hesitated, glancing at the saleswoman, who pointed at Denzel dramatically. "He's causing a disturbance. He threatened me," she cried, clutching her chest as if she were in mortal danger. "He needs to leave now." The guards moved in closer, clearly deciding that it was easier to side with their co-worker than to question the situation. One grabbed Denzel's arm, not roughly, but with enough force to make it clear that resistance would not be tolerated. "Sir, you need to leave immediately," the guard said, his voice low and robotic. Denzel yanked his arm free. "I'm not going anywhere until the police get here," he said loudly, looking around the store, hoping to catch the eye of anyone who would back him up, who would acknowledge the wrongness of what was happening. But the other shoppers looked away, burying their faces in their phones or pretending to be fascinated by price tags, unwilling to get involved. The saleswoman smirked, sensing victory. "You're lucky we don't call immigration on you," she sneered under her breath, just loud enough for Denzel to hear. His blood boiled. "That's it," he said, picking up his phone from the floor, checking to make sure it wasn't broken, and immediately redialing. The guards moved to grab him again, but he dodged back, raising a hand. "Touch me again, and that's assault," he said, his voice sharp and commanding. The call connected, and Denzel spoke quickly, giving the police the name of the store and a brief description of the situation. The dispatcher promised that officers would be dispatched immediately. Denzel ended the call and looked back at the guards. "You can throw me out if you want," he said, "but the police are on their way. And when they get here, you'll have a lot of explaining to do." The saleswoman's face twisted into a sneer, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes now. She didn't expect him to fight back. She thought he would slink away quietly, humiliated and broken. But Denzel Washington wasn't built that way. The security guards hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but still moved to escort him out. Denzel allowed them to guide him toward the door, but he did it on his own terms, his head held high, his spine straight, his dignity intact. As he stepped back out onto the sidewalk, the cool air wrapped around him again, but this time it felt invigorating, like armor against the ugliness he had just faced. He stood outside the store, arms folded across his chest, staring back through the glass. The saleswoman retreated behind the counter, barking orders at the other employees, who scurried around nervously. Pretending not to notice the black man standing proudly outside their precious boutique. Denzel waited, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew one thing for sure. He was not going to let them bury this. Not today. Not ever. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The other shoppers trickled out of the store, casting nervous glances at Denzel as they passed, some giving him wide berths, others offering awkward, pitying looks that made him burn with humiliation all over again. But he refused to move. He stood his ground. And then, finally, the flashing lights of a police cruiser pulled up to the curb, and 2 officers stepped out, 1 male, 1 female, both wearing neutral expressions that revealed nothing of their thoughts. Denzel approached them calmly, explaining the situation as clearly and succinctly as he could. The officers listened, asked a few questions, then turned and entered the boutique, leaving Denzel standing outside, his fists clenching and unclenching with nervous energy. Through the glass, he saw the confrontation unfold, the saleswoman gesticulating wildly, the manager appearing from the back, looking pale and sweaty. The officers' faces growing more serious with each passing second. After what felt like an eternity, the manager himself came out, followed closely by the officers. His face was strained, his voice shaking slightly as he addressed Denzel. "Mr. Washington," he said, his tone ingratiating and desperate, "we deeply apologize for the behavior you experienced. It was completely unacceptable, and we are taking immediate action to address it." Denzel said nothing, just stared at him, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. The manager swallowed hard. "The employee responsible has been terminated effective immediately," he continued. "We value all of our customers and do not tolerate discrimination of any kind." Still, Denzel said nothing. He could see the fear in the manager's eyes, the realization that this could destroy their business, their reputation, their lives. "Please," the manager added, his voice dropping to a whisper, "is there anything we can do to make this right?" Denzel finally spoke, his voice icy and measured. "You can't erase what happened here today," he said. "You can't erase how you made me feel. How many others have you treated this way when no one was watching?" The manager opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. The police officer stepped forward. "Mr. Washington," she said, "you have every right to file a formal complaint. We can assist you with that if you wish." Denzel nodded slowly. "Oh, I will," he said. "Believe me, I will." And with that, he turned and walked away from the boutique without another word, the weight of their stares following him down the street. Each step he took hammering a hole into the polished facade of their prejudice. Each breath he drew a testament to his strength, to his refusal to be broken. As Denzel stood outside the boutique, the chill of the evening settling into his bones, he could feel the weight of injustice pressing harder against his chest. And he knew deep down that walking away wasn't an option. Not this time. Not after everything he'd just endured. So without hesitation, he lifted his phone again. His fingers steady despite the rage simmering just beneath his skin, and he dialed the police once more, this time insisting firmly that he was a victim of racial discrimination and assault. Emphasizing the urgency and demanding officers be dispatched immediately, the dispatcher assuring him they were en route as Denzel remained rooted to the sidewalk, refusing to let them erase him like he was nothing, and after what felt like an eternity of pacing and tight, shallow breaths, 2 patrol cars finally pulled up, the blue and red lights flashing across the glossy windows of the boutique, reflecting a fractured, distorted version of the scene unfolding, the officers stepping out with serious expressions, scanning the area before approaching Denzel, who explained everything in calm, meticulous detail, laying bare the humiliation, the aggression, the overt racism he had suffered inside that so-called luxury store. And as he spoke, he could see the flicker of understanding, of anger even, cross the officers' faces, professional but human, and they nodded before marching into the boutique without hesitation, Denzel trailing a few steps behind, but staying outside as instructed, watching through the glass as the officers confronted the staff, their badges and authority shattering the smug arrogance that had so recently infected the saleswoman and her co-workers. And it wasn't long before the store manager, a balding man with sweat stains darkening the underarms of his expensive shirt, rushed outside toward Denzel, his hands up in a placating gesture. His face pale and desperate. "Mr. Washington, please, I want to personally apologize for the unacceptable treatment you received here today, he stammered, his voice trembling with the realization that their actions had real, devastating consequences. It does not reflect our values. It was a terrible mistake. But Denzel remained silent, his jaw tight. His eyes locked on the manager with an expression that made it clear that words would never be enough. And behind the manager the saleswoman herself appeared, her earlier sneer replaced by a pathetic, quivering smile, her voice cracking as she mumbled a string of empty apologies. But Denzel saw through it all, saw the fear of repercussions rather than any genuine remorse, saw the cracks in their polished facade as the officers stepped back outside, speaking quietly into their radios as they began filing reports, and moments later a city inspector, apparently called by the police for immediate investigation, arrived on the scene, clipboard in hand, his sharp eyes sweeping over the boutique and its staff with thinly veiled disdain. And it was then, as the inspector began citing multiple violations not only regarding the discrimination Denzel faced, but also hidden regulatory issues the investigation uncovered, lack of proper licenses, unsafe work conditions, that the true collapse began, the boutique owners arriving in expensive cars only to find chaos greeting them, their fury at the staff not hidden, public accusations and blame flying in all directions, and amidst the shouting and scrambling, the manager turned back to Denzel, tears of frustration in his eyes now, begging one last time for forgiveness. "We're so sorry, Mr. Washington. Please, we beg you to reconsider. We'll make this right. Discounts, store credit, anything." But Denzel simply shook his head slowly, his voice low but powerful as he replied, "Some things you can't fix with an apology or a gift card." And he turned his back on them, walking away from the boutique without so much as a glance over his shoulder. The final blow landing when the inspector officially ordered the store closed pending a full investigation. Heavy fines looming and mass firings already beginning as ownership desperately tried to salvage what little was left. But it was too late, far too late, and as Denzel disappeared into the night, the cold wind at his back, he knew that for once justice hadn't been denied, and he smiled bitterly to himself, carrying the weight of the day's events with dignity, knowing that sometimes refusing to be silent was the most powerful stand a man could take.